So today I'm going to be talking about rhythm, timbre, and texture. We're going to be looking at the three of those within Studio One. Okay, so here I am with a blank session from Studio One. And I want to start by talking about rhythm. We've already talked a bunch about rhythm in reference to melody. So if you remember, all melody also has a rhythmic component, and as we also learned, if harmony is more than just one chord, it has to have two chords. Then there is some sort of rhythmic element to harmony also. So all of these parameters interrelate with one another. You can't think of them as completely separate. So yes, rhythm, like melody, is patterned. Rhythm is a pattern that happens in time. So let's pull over here I am over in my loops section, and I can pull over a MIDI file. And again, so I kind of listened through several of them, and I wanted to find a really simple rhythm that we could toy around with. So here I'm going to audition or the rhythm. So that's the loop. It's a drum beat. I'm going to drag this over. Okay, I have dragged this over, and I'm going to sort of remind you what's going on here. So here on my timeline, I see the MIDI file itself. This is all MIDI information. MIDI is not sounds. It's just note numbers, durations, and velocities. So that's what I see here in the MIDI editor window. So if just like with audio, if I select this block of MIDI and I loop selection, turn looping on, this will now loop. Whoops, excuse me. I should rewind it all the way to the beginning. There we go. This will loop. Okay. So as a reminder, this is just MIDI. It's just MIDI information. It's just note numbers, durations, and velocities. If I'm going to click on this piano keyboard, which will open up the instrument editor, which is going to be a presence synthesizer with a large kit loaded, right? So I'm going to press play again. Okay, so as a reminder, let's see. So let's just take a look at what is. So it's large kit, which I would assume is in drum kits. Let's see. Yeah, large kit is in drum kits. Now, just to do a quick little demonstration here of what MIDI is, let's switch the program or switch the library of sounds that the MIDI information is triggering. So let's switch it to a guitar. Let's switch it to a banjo. Okay. Now when I've switched the program from a large kit to a banjo, and if I press play, instead of getting those drums, we'll get some funny like a funny banjo tune. Okay, so just because I think this is kind of fun, let's just do one more. Let's see if we can find something that would also be interesting to listen to. All right, let's do a tuba. Everybody loves tuba. At least I do. Whoops. Okay, so now I've switched it to tuba. Okay, so and because of the way that the MIDI is written here, this is more than one tuba, right? We have some. Once I switched from the large kit over to tuba, we've got some chords because we have more than one note playing at the same time. So. Right. So this is both to emphasize that MIDI is not a sound. MIDI is just note numbers and durations and velocities that are telling some library of sounds what to play when. But I think I can also use this as a way to show how you can creatively take these MIDI loops in Studio One, and as soon as you start switching the program or switching the library of sounds, you can get some really interesting results. And so this could be a way that you could take some of these patterns that are in the form of loops, pull them over, and totally switch the instruments around and start to build a song around the results that you get. I'm going to now switch this back over to the original drum kit so that we can talk about rhythm. So I've now switched this back. So let's take a look at the MIDI editor window here. Okay, so C1, which is the lowest C on the piano, is the bass drum. If I click on these MIDI notes, I can but just like if I were to press on the key over here, I can hear what the sound is. Notice that each of these hits also has a corresponding velocity value. If I hover my cursor over the hit, this has a 100% velocity value. This has an 88.2% velocity value. This has a 100. Okay. I can see that it's got a 100% because the bar, this durational bar of MIDI, this MIDI note here, C1, is also completely filled in with the lighter blue. So, like for instance here, 80% velocity, and you can see that like the lighter blue fills in about 80% of this block of MIDI, right? This has 63%. These these velocity values are also down here in the velocity window. Okay, so that is why when I click on these bass drum hits, and I compare those three sounds with just hitting the key over here, so the default velocity here is less than 100%. You can hear the difference. The variation in velocity here of this loop is part of what makes it sound more like a live drum player. Because if you think about it, if you're playing drums, first off, it would be impossible to play the bass drum the same exact amount of loudness every time. Second off, the variation in velocity or the variation in volume is part of what gives a rhythm its shape. So when we have differences in volume between different hits on the same sound, this is what is called giving something an accent. So emphasizing, so if you're repeating something, you can emphasize one sound on one particular beat in order to give the rhythm itself a sort of feel and shape. So let me show you how. Let me give you an example of this. So here we have this rhythm. Okay, so we have this consistent hi-hat here. It's playing twice per beat. I know this because the beats are being counted up top. Excuse me. It's being played once per beat on every beat. So on 1, 2, 3, 4. 1, 2, 3, 4. Let's say I wanted to change the volume of these hi-hats so that on beats 2 and 4, they're much louder. So, excuse me. So I can do this by, I'm going to grab my paint tool. So what I'm doing here is I'm sort of grabbing on to this velocity value. I'm grabbing onto this velocity. I'm holding down with my mouse right now, and I'm able to change the volume of this one hit. So I'm just going to make that all the way up. I'm going to select here, do the same. So what I've done is I've brought the velocity all the way up on 2 and 4 of the hi-hat. Let's listen to that. So these accents are certainly changing the feel of the rhythm. They're really emphasizing the 2 and the 4 of this rhythm. You can imagine, for instance, what if now let's say that I want to I'm going to start messing with where the hits are actually happening in this rhythm. And now I'm just moving these louder hi-hat hits to in between the beats, to in between 2 and 3 and 4 and 1. Let's listen to that. So, so as you can hear, by changing the velocity on the hi-hat hits, it's kind of giving this other shape to the rhythm. Maybe a way to better emphasize this would be to, I'm just going to get rid of all of these hi-hat hits. And this is like a closed hi-hat sound, and I'm going to put this on all of the eighth notes, or 2 per beat. Or how about, let's do it 16th notes. So I've put, and again, these are all going to give us the same velocity, which is 80%. And then what I'm going to do is copy and paste all this all the way across, so we have like a tick, 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 tick. And then I'm going to start messing with the velocity of all of these closed hi-hat hits. So I'm copying. I'm just going to start pasting So what I'm doing is I am modifying this rhythm by increasing the number of hits within one beat. So if you remember, it was just one per beat. Now I've increased to 4, and we can expect to hear tick, 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 right? So okay. So we've got this sort of disco-y 16th note thing going on. Now, what I can do is I can go in here and start adjusting some of these velocity values. And what I'm going to do is create some variation in the volume of the tick, 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 tick. And what you'll hear is these accents, this sort of, and you can see where the accents are going to happen based on based on looking at these at the velocity values down here. So these higher levels are going to be accented hi-hat hits. And what that's going to do is give this a little bit of, a little shape. So let's listen to that. Okay. I can also decrease some of these values to also emphasize. So it isn't just about increasing values to create an accent. If you make the sounds that surround one of these hi-hat hits, not just if you make them even quieter, that can also emphasize the louder ones. So it isn't just about making something louder, it's about making what surrounds it quieter. So to emphasize that, let me just finish making these quick changes. What we can expect is a more sort of syncopated thing. So when I say syncopated, it's when you hear emphasis, accents on beats that aren't the main beats, that aren't 1, 2, 3, 4. So anything that comes in between, and it kind of gives it a funky feel because it's syncopated. You feel that everything should just be like 4 to the floor, right? The bass drum should just be dun 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 dun. And maybe the hi-hat would be the same, but what I've done is I've made these accents that aren't landing on 1, 2, 3, 4. So it's like duka taka duka taka duka taka duka taka kind of a thing. So let's listen to that. Okay, so you can hear that that as I'm switching the velocity of these different hi-hats around, we're getting a syncopated feel, which is emphasizing beats that aren't the dun 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 dun, right? So things are being emphasized like So we're emphasizing beats that aren't the main 1, 2, 3, 4 beats. As I was doing this and sort of clicking on these hi-hats, I started to hear this kind of like quicker hi-hat hit that was faster than the 16th note. So like, right? And you probably were hearing that as I was clicking on these individual hi-hat hits. And so let's say I like that. Let's say I want to do some of these quick little flammy hi-hat hits. In order to do that, I'm going to have to change the grid, right? So right now, the grid is lined up to 16ths. So every time I click on one of these hi-hats so like, let's say I just take this out, right? If I were to just double click, it's going to give me a hi-hat hit that is exactly 16, a 16th long. But let's say I wanted it to be quicker. So, right? So would be half of a 16th. So half of 1/16, because we're talking in fractions here, is 1/32. Okay, and so when I've switched over, you can see already the grid has become twice, or half as, the grid is like twice as narrow, or twice as quick. So now I can kind of throw in some of these quicker hi-hat hits. So let's listen to that. Right? So you can, now it's starting to get more of this sort of like drum line sort of feel in the hi-hat that maybe I like. It's definitely making this sound less like a rock beat and more like something else. So far, what we've been looking at as far as in relation to rhythm, right? Rhythm is a pattern in time, but we're looking at the way that this pattern in time can be given shape. What's important to note here is that these changes in volume give the rhythm shape. So when I started changing the volume of the hi-hat to make it more, emphasize the offbeats more, it changed the nature of the rhythm. So it isn't just about adding more hi-hat hits that makes it less like a rock beat, but it's also the sort of the way that the offbeats are being played or emphasized that makes it sound like something else. So a rhythm isn't just a pattern, it's how the pattern, a pattern in time, it's a pattern in relative difference in volume or relative difference in loudness is also what gives a rhythm its shape. So we've also been looking, like we've been talking about this whole semester in relation to the time and the ruler that we see up top in any sort of like DAW, as we see time go from left to right. We're also understanding rhythm as a sequence over some sort of consistent tempo, some sort of consistent beat. Now, most dance music these days, right, is 4 to the floor. In other words, a bass drum hit on every beat. This rhythm is not 4 to the floor. What if I wanted to make it 4 to the floor? I'm going to switch my quantization to quarter beats. Now I can move these bass drum hits so that I'm just going to erase this. So now what I've done is I've just put bass drum hits on the quarter beats, which is 4 to the floor. So let's listen to that. Okay? So that is every beat is being played by the bass drum. Now, I'm going to switch this rhythm around, and I'm going to do this to demonstrate something about the nature of the quote-unquote beat. So just be listening to this loop and be paying attention to, be thinking about what is happening to the beat. Okay? So here's the crazy thing. Right now, the way that I've modified this rhythm, there are certain beats within this loop where nothing is happening. So on the second beat of the first measure, right here, it's totally empty. On the first beat or the downbeat of the second measure, it's totally empty. On the third beat of the second measure, it's totally empty. So nothing is happening there, right? And yet, the beat is continuing. When we listen to it, we hear the patterning continue even though there is no sound there. So when no sound is happening on beat 2 of the first measure and on 1 and 3 of the second measure, it's not when we listen to it, the music does not stop, right? It continues. In our brains, perceptually, we are continuing this sort of the tempo. We're continuing the beat. It's not like the song just stops for us perceptually and then all of a sudden starts again on this offbeat here. Like it's continuing. So what that means is that for us, the beat is a lot like MIDI. In other words, that we don't hear, the beat doesn't make sound, but we hear it. Okay? So the beat is something that is going on in our brains as we listen to music and pattern it as we listen. The beat does not make a sound, but we hear it. So this, when you think about this is really quite remarkable. If you think about what is happening to us or what we are doing while we're listening to music, all of the different aspects of information that we are putting together and constantly recreating as it goes. And it's amazing like how much information and how complex this is and how we're able to do this just in the background of our consciousness. So let's listen to this one more time. And again, you're going to be thinking about like, well, what I'll do is I'll turn on the metronome. So then this should really emphasize this. So the metronome, of course, plays on every beat. So can you kind of hear that? How in your own listening, how you're sort of it could be you're tapping your foot, you're nodding your head, but what's going on is you're always hearing the beat, even though it's not sounding in the room. Okay, let's talk now. Let's move over to talking about our next topic, which is timbre. We can think of timbre as the tone color of the instrument. And a really good way to think to dig into this is with percussion instruments, because they absolutely have frequency components. In other words, pitches have particular frequencies, right? So, for instance, if I were to pull over a presence instrument, so I'm doing this to emphasize something about frequency and pitch and timbre. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to select an oboe. So I've pulled over an oboe, and so this So I happen to know that pitch, which is an A, is 440 cycles per second. So you've probably heard this before, A440. When you go to listen to a symphony orchestra, they'll all come out there and they'll all be like, all the string players will be sort of warming up and riffing and doing their runs on their strings, and everyone's kind of making that sort of orchestra cacophony sound, and then the first violinist will stand up and signal that everyone needs to tune, and the oboe will play that pitch. Everyone will tune to A440. When we say A440, we say 440 because it's 440 hertz, or 440 cycles per second. So each pitch has its own frequency, 440, 880. We talked about this earlier in the semester. So all of these frequencies have proportional relationships. Now, when you think back to your sound collage project, you probably put some sounds in there that weren't just clear pitch sounds, but maybe like a cymbal or an explosion or whatever, and you looked at those waveforms. Now, those waveforms have all sorts of frequency components, because we know that a waveform is the patterned back and forth of air molecules from compression to rarefaction, or from being pushed close together to being pulled far apart. And that something that is pitched is just very much more, the pattern is much more consistent. So that sound is consistently going back and forth at 440 times per second. But a sound like something like, let's see, something like this. Whoops. Trying to find a cymbal here. Good. So this crash is also a waveform, but it doesn't have the same very clear back and forth. So it isn't just, there are a bunch of different frequencies happening in there, not just 440, but a whole bunch that are sort of clashing together into this much more dissonant sound. So this is a timbral difference. To emphasize this, let me go back to so here is an oboe. Let me play the same pitch on a. Let's try a clarinet. Same pitch, different color. Let's try a flute. Same pitch, different color. Let's try this is lush strings. Same pitch, different color. So what we're talking about here is timbre. So you can have the same sort of frequency that we are going to recognize as A440, but a different instrument is going to have different physical properties that make that particular frequency have a different sort of color, because they're going to resonate in different ways. So if you can imagine a flute, right? And so that's doing your that sound. It's going through metal. It's going through a metal pipe. If you play it on an oboe, it's going through wood, and the oboe itself has a double reed mouthpiece, whereas a flute you're blowing over a wind hole. If you're playing on a string, it's wood and, of course, string, right? So you've got horsehair, you have the string, and you have the wood that's resonating. If you're playing a piano, it's a string that's being struck by a hammer, et cetera, et cetera. All of these instruments can resonate at A440 or whatever pitch frequency you choose, but they're going to resonate in different ways because of their physical construction, because one might be made out of metal, one might be made out of wood, one might be made out of plastic. Whatever it is, it's going to have a different sort of property, and that's going to color the sound in a different way. When we look at MIDI, these instruments are designed to mimic those physical properties. So here we have lush strings. So not only is this MIDI patch attempting to mimic, or I should say this program is attempting to mimic the timbre of a string instrument, it's trying to mimic the timbre of many string instruments. So strings plural. So what they've done is they've added some reverb, is what it sounds like. And you can hear that these multiple strings that are all playing the same note, basically what they've done is they've created a program where they're not absolutely exactly in tune with one another. And that's what gives it that sort of chorusing effect, the wah, 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 wah. Because if you think about it, even the best orchestras in the world, you've got 20 first violinists up there. You've probably got a total of 40 distinct violinists all playing together. Now, they're all world-class musicians. They're all very good at playing in tune, but no human is going to be able to be exactly in tune the way that a machine can be. And that is a good thing. That's why we like lush strings. That's why we create these these MIDI instruments that mimic that sound, because that sort of quote-unquote imperfection, or the not exactly precisely in tuneness, is what gives it its sort of rich sound. And then, so interestingly enough, we then have decided, well, we don't actually like don't necessarily only like electronic instruments that just play perfect, exactly in tune pitches. We kind of like this richer effect that comes from acoustic sound. So here we're talking about the tone color. And of course, the tone color of an instrument can be changed as well. You can have a flute sound. If you think about somebody playing a flute, they can play the flute in a way, in all sorts of different ways, to bring out different colors within the sound of the flute. So you could blow really, really hard and get this really sort of this high shrill sound, or you can blow very lightly and have this more mellow sound. Now, we can't really do that with this pre-programmed MIDI or pre-programmed flute sound, because it's all going to be, we can't really control it in real time. We can't change the amount of air pressure we're putting on the flute. So what can we do? Well, first off, there are different flute sounds that are included here. So I'm switching between flute and flute 1. So flute 1 has, like I was saying, it's like it sounds like the flutist, quote unquote, is putting less air over the mouth hole and giving it this more mellow sound that's really emphasizing the bottom end of the sound. Let's switch to flute number 2. Okay, so this also has kind of a mellow sound, but it definitely has you get less of the breathiness. So let's go back to flute 1 and see if you can really hear the breathiness. So yeah, they've designed this patch here, this program, to emulate the sound of somebody's lips breathing, buzzing over the top of that flute. This is synthesized, so it's like you can figure out what those frequencies are of a buzzing lip over the a flute mouthpiece and mimic that. Let's go to the first flute sound. Okay, so each of these flute sounds are these programs have a different sort of timbre to the whole instrument. We can also, as we've looked at before, you can start to play around with the amplitude envelope, and start to toy with some of these knobs and see how you can change the timbre of the instrument that is pre-programmed. So, just as a reminder, I mean, we can. So here I'm kind of, by adjusting the envelope, I'm making it so that it sounds like they kind of, the flautist isn't just like making these sharp attacks, but is kind of leaning into them a little bit. I can emphasize this even more. Or I can, like it was before, et cetera, et cetera. I could also start toying around with some with other things that I see on the face here, et cetera, et cetera. So so you can adjust the timbre, the tone color of these instruments within the Presence instrument itself, or as I was, Alicia brought up this problem that she was having with general MIDI sounds. I can also use these effects to to modify the timbre of the instrument. Okay, so let's see how I might do that. I'm going to pull over. Okay, now we know what happens when we have this distortion unit on a track. We know that we risk it being very loud. So I'm going to start with the output way down. Okay, so let's say I like that. I could also, again, create an effects chain here. So now I already have that distortion on there. I've pulled over this filter here, this channel strip filter. So you could imagine how if I were to automate this filter here, I can now emulate this flautist changing the timbre with how they are modifying their lips and the air pressure. So listen to that. I'm just going to play one note, and I'm going to start moving this high-pass filter around, and I'm going to try to emulate a flautist sort of changing the shape of their lips and the air pressure they're putting over the flute. So you can start to see how by creating effects chains with these MIDI instruments, you can, and using automation as you were using it in the Sound Collage project, you can create some really interesting timbral effects that mimic how people play instruments. Okay, so the last thing that we are going to be talking about today is texture. And what texture is how many voices are playing at a single time. So right now I have this loop over here. Let's say I put a whole bunch of loops on top of each other, and I'm just going to select some just at random. Okay. And okay, so all I really did is just grab a bunch of loops at random and pull them over, and this is going to give us a new, and these are all going to be playing along with the rhythm that I created earlier by modifying the classic rock rhythm from the loops selection. So let's listen to what all this sort of sounds like. So we've got 4 different instruments playing all at once. Let's listen to them all but one at a time. So we know that one. Let's see, the pizzicato shuffle. Okay. Then we have chord chorus guitar. Okay. Then we have classic synth. Okay, so this is a texture in that we have multiple voices all playing at the same time. So it's similar to harmony, but we can hear these different timbres as separate, and that gives us a sense of the overall sort of tapestry of the music. So what I'm noticing as I'm listening to these three together, the pizzicato strings and the classic synth are kind of in the same general region of the keyboard, and so they're kind of just like blending in with one another. Now that might be fine, but let's say I want the texture to be such that they are more distinct from one another. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to select all of those MIDI notes, and I can see that this is landing on a C. Let's say I wanted to shift all of these up an octave. So I just grabbed it and I shifted it up one whole octave, and let's see how that sounds. So you can hear already that just by shifting up this synth pattern up an octave, it made the voices between the strings and the synth are much more distinct. The texture itself has become sort of more clear because it's easier to hear the difference between these different instruments because they're occupying different ranges of the keyboard. What if I were to shift this up even another octave? Okay. So I think you get the point that when you start to think about the relationship between these different MIDI instruments, be thinking about which octave or which range of the keyboard each of them is occupying. Now, it could be that you want them all to be in the same range and to have it be this very sort of like foggy, hard to distinguish like who is saying what sort of texture. Or maybe you want it to be really clear and like very sort of like kaleidoscopic in the sense that you can hear all of these different timbres, but each of them has their own space. So these are things to be thinking about as you start to put different MIDI instruments on top of each other in different tracks. All right, so that takes us through all of the musical parameters. We talked about melody, harmony, rhythm, timbre, or tone color, and texture, or the number of voices and how they relate within the sort of tapestry of music. What range of the keyboard or the frequency spectrum they occupy, and how well we can differentiate between the different voices or the different sounds, the different lines, I guess is probably a better way to think about it. Okay, so be thinking about all this as you listen to the examples for listening assignment number 5. Also be thinking about these and the techniques that I went through as far as how to use the MIDI editing window to experiment and do some composition. On Thursday, we will be updating each other on your work on the song project, and we'll start to do some troubleshooting and some brainstorming about what you're doing. If there's something you would like to share, that would be great. So if you could sign on to our video conference on a computer that you have access to your DAW and have the session already open, we could do some screen sharing, and you can play us what you've got if that is something that what would be useful to you. So consider that, and I'll see you then. I hope that you have a great rest of your day.